Do you still remember Deliverance in 1972? That simple canoe trip terrified audiences, but the real horrors came later. The actors left the river thinking the danger was over, only to face fame that broke them, addictions that haunted them, marriages that collapsed, and destinies more brutal than the script itself. Today, we uncover where they are now and the legacies they left behind. Jon Voight, as Ed Gentry. Jon Voight was born on December 29, 1938, in Yonkers, New York. At 34 years old, Voight played Ed Gentry, the ordinary man forced to confront extraordinary brutality in Deliverance, 1972. The role marked the beginning of a long in Hollywood, and as his star rose, the weight of his private life began to pull in the opposite direction. His first marriage to Laurie Peters unraveled during the years he was working on Midnight Cowboy, 1969, a film that demanded months of psychological preparation and press obligations that kept him constantly away from home. His second marriage to Marceline Bertrand lasted longer, but cracked under the strain of back-to-back roles and Voight's growing emotional distance during productions like The Odessa File, 1974. The fallout sharpened when old disagreements resurfaced during Jolie's rise to fame, turning their already fragile relationship into a long-standing rift. By the time he publicly acknowledged the estrangement, the damage had lingered for over a decade. His health issues surfaced gradually. Years of physical roles, particularly the demanding movements in Runaway Train, 1985, which earned him an Oscar nomination, left him with chronic back pain that worsened with age. Even in lighter films like Anaconda, 1997, he performed scenes that required prolonged physical strain, contributing to persistent fatigue in the following years. In 2025, Voight is 86 years old, still acting with deliberate care, but no longer chasing the breakneck schedule that defined his earlier decades. His net worth of roughly $55 million, built from hit films such as Pearl Harbor, 2001, Mission: Impossible, 1996, and long-running TV work, now supports a slower, more reflective life. And while his legacy remains admired, it is Deliverance that continues to resonate most. Burt Reynolds, as Lewis Medlock. Burt Reynolds was born on February 11, 1936, in Lansing, Michigan. At 36 years old, Reynolds played Lewis Medlock, the fearless, muscled survivalist whose dominance gave Deliverance, 1972. It vaulted him overnight into 1970s superstardom, and the fame that followed gave him everything except the stability he quietly hoped for. His love life fractured under pressures he rarely admitted. The marriage to Judy Carne crumbled as his visibility surged, and the later union with Lonnie Anderson collapsed spectacularly during the promotional chaos of Smokey and the Bandit 2, 1980, and Cannonball Run, 1981, when financial disputes spilled into the tabloids. His bond with Sally Field, who appeared with him in 4 films, dissolved as overlapping productions. Even as he led the world's box office from 1978 to 1982, his relationships weakened in the shadow of a career. His body carried the bill for the image he projected. The waterfall stunt in Deliverance left lingering spinal pain. The fight scenes in The Man Who Loved Cat Dancing, 1973, caused a hernia, and the fractured jaw on City Heat, 1984, locked him into a liquid diet that triggered a years-long dependence on painkillers. Prostate cancer in 2009, heart surgery in 2010, and a lifetime of untreated anxiety made work increasingly difficult, even as he earned renewed acclaim with Boogie Nights, 1997. Reynolds died on September 6, 2018, at age 82 from cardiac arrest in Jupiter, Florida, an ending as abrupt as many of the stunts he once insisted on performing. His ashes were interred at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in 2021 beneath a bronze bust unveiled on what would have been his 85th birthday. His 2025 net worth, around $5 million, reflected decades of failed business ventures, alimony, and bankruptcy filings. Ned Beatty as Bobby Tripp. Ned Beatty was born on July 6, 1937, in Louisville, Kentucky. At 35 years old, Beatty played Bobby Tripp, the unsuspecting outsider whose assault became one of cinema's most disturbing moments in Deliverance, 1972. The scene made him instantly recognizable across Hollywood, but the recognition came with a weight few actors were prepared to carry. His marriage to Sandra Johnson became his anchor after earlier unions had struggled under the demands of non-stop work. During the mid-1970s, as he appeared in The Life and Times of Judge Roy Bean, 1972, and the ensemble film Nashville, 1975, he deliberately avoided leading man offers to keep from being permanently tied to the vulnerability audiences associated with Deliverance. When Network, 1976, earned him an Oscar nomination, the pressure sharpened. Bigger roles were available, yet he turned many down to protect the fragile stability he and Sandra had finally built. His health declined quietly, shaped by years of excess weight and the exhaustion of appearing in more than 160 film and television productions. Long shooting schedules on Superman, 1978, Back to School, 1986, and later Rudy, 1993, pushed his stamina further than he acknowledged, and by the 2000s, cardiovascular strain limited the kinds of roles he could accept. Voice work, like Lotso in Toy Story 3, 2010, and Tortoise John in Rango, 2011, became a refuge. The shift was subtle but necessary. Beatty died on June 13, 2021, at age 83 from natural causes at his Los Angeles home. His estate, valued at approximately $4 million in 2025, reflected a career built on relentless output, over 160 roles across 5 decades in film, television, and theater. He left behind a legacy defined not by a single haunting scene, but by the sheer breadth of work that followed, proving that he was far more than the moment that first made the world remember his name. Ronnie Cox as Drew Ballinger. Ronnie Cox was born on July 23, 1938, in Cloudcroft, New Mexico. At 34 years old, Cox played Drew Ballinger, the earnest guitarist whose haunting Dueling Banjos performance became the heartbeat of Deliverance, 1972. The film marked his screen debut, propelling him instantly from regional theater actor to Hollywood's radar. And from that breakthrough moment, his life moved between fame and a private love story that shaped everything he later became. His marriage to Mary Cox lasted 46 years, a rare Hollywood union built on devotion but repeatedly tested by the demands of his rising career. During the years he filmed Beverly Hills Cop, 1984, and RoboCop, 1987, he spent months on set, leaving Mary to hold their home together as he navigated the expectations of major studio productions. Their 2 sons were raised through this pattern of brief reunions, and though the marriage remained strong, the industry's constant travel left them fighting for time that was never guaranteed. When Mary died in 2006, exactly 50 years after their first date, the loss tore through him so deeply that he refused nearly 90% of the acting offers that followed. Illness did not dominate his life, but grief reshaped it entirely. Instead of returning to high-profile roles like Captain Jellicoe in Star Trek: The Next Generation, he turned to music as a form of survival, performing folk sets inspired by the songs he once shared privately with Mary. His annual tours in Ireland became a sanctuary, where he played intimate venues and released albums through small labels. Even when he appeared again in projects such as Dexter, 2011, or Nashville, 2018, the work carried a softer, more reflective energy. In 2025, Cox is 87 years old and still performs more than 100 shows a year, astonishing audiences with a stamina that seems to defy time. His estimated net worth of around $3 million comes largely from decades of touring, album sales, and steady character roles across more than 50 films and television series. He continues to live on the road, carrying Mary's memory from stage to stage, a musician actor. Seaman Glass as First Griner. Seaman Glass was born on January 17, 1925, in New York. At 47 years old, Glass played First Griner, the grim, watchful mountain man whose presence helped define Deliverance, 1972. His performance carried a rawness in every scene, and as soon as the film ended, his life slipped back into the strange rhythm between Hollywood opportunity and the solitude in his troubled life. His marriage could not survive that internal distance. He attempted to steady his home life while taking roles in modest but gritty projects such as This Is Not a Test, 1962, and guest appearances on television, yet the constant rotation of jobs, teaching, maritime work, harbor patrol, eroded any sense of permanence. The emotional gap widened further after long stretches at sea, a period he later admitted left him feeling more like a ghost than a husband. By the late 1970s, the relationship faded beyond repair, and they divorced. And his health reflected the same slow wear. Partial deafness made it difficult to follow cues on the set of The Other Side of Hell, 1978, and he increasingly stepped away from demanding roles because his body no longer matched the intensity directors wanted. Years of heavy labor left his lungs weakened, and the fatigue showed during night shifts as a Santa Monica harbor patrolman. Even brief returns to film, like Hawkins' Breed, 1988, required rest days he once would have dismissed. Glass died on July 12, 2016, in Los Angeles at age 91, closing a life shaped more by endurance than applause. His estimated net worth, around $1.2 million from pensions, teaching work, and occasional acting, was modest but stable, reflecting a man who lived by practicality rather than celebrity. Macon McCalman as Deputy Queen. Macon McCalman was born on December 30, 1932, in Memphis, Tennessee. At 40 years old, he played Deputy Queen, the low-key but sharply observant officer whose quiet authority deepened Deliverance, 1972. The role arrived just as he was transitioning from stage to screen. And with that, his life moved into a rhythm where each new role tested the fragile balance between ambition and stability. His marriage to actress Pat McCalman endured for decades, shaped by the unpredictable cadence of Broadway and television work. While performing in The Last of Mrs. Lincoln, 1971, and later appearing in miniseries such as Captains and the Kings, 1976, the long separations became a quiet tax on their intimacy, teaching them to value the short stretches of normality between productions. The absence of children deepened their reliance on each other, especially during the 1980s when his workload increased with episodic roles on Cheers, Murder, She Wrote, and Three's Company. His health weakened gradually, beginning with the heart attack in 1997 that cut short what had been a late surge in recognition following Falling Down, 1993. Though he attempted to stay active, recovery proved elusive, and the strokes that followed only worsened the decline. Years of heavy smoking hardened into chronic respiratory problems that made even small roles impossible. By the time he returned permanently to Memphis, his career had become something he spoke of in the past tense. McCalman died on November 29, 2005, at age 72 after suffering multiple strokes, a final reminder of the health battles that had overshadowed his last years. His estimated net worth of about $2 million came from decades of steady supporting roles across more than 40 film and television credits, including Smokey and the Bandit, 1977, and The Falcon and the Snowman, 1985. His burial was private, but on screen he remains one of those rare actors whose brief appearances carried more weight than many leading performances. Bill McKinney as Mountain Man. Bill McKinney was born on September 12, 1931, in Barton, Arkansas. At 41 years old, he played the Mountain Man, the sadistic backwoods attacker whose presence made Deliverance, 1972, one of the most unsettling films ever made. The role stamped him instantly as Hollywood's dangerous villain, and from that moment on, every part of his life moved in the shadow of that performance. His marriages, brief unions with Felicity June Bach and later Janelle Booth, fell apart as he struggled with alcohol and the emotional toll of constantly being cast as violent men. Even when he earned attention in The Outlaw Josie Wales, 1976, or appeared in Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, 1974, the industry's demand for his darker persona consumed the stability he needed at home. Teaching at Cave Spring High School during his early acting years was an attempt at normalcy, but the work in Hollywood always pulled him away again, leaving little space for a marriage to heal. His health deteriorated slowly, marked first by years of heavy smoking that left him increasingly winded on sets like Bronco Billy, 1980, and Every Which Way But Loose, 1978. When esophageal cancer appeared in his late 70s, the decline was swift, cutting into what remained of a career that had spanned more than 5 decades. Even while recording his country album Love Songs from Antry or making late appearances in The Green Mile, 1999, he worked through a fatigue that signaled the illness he tried quietly to ignore. McKinney died on December 1, 2011, at age 80 from esophageal cancer at his home in San Fernando, California. His estimated 2025 estate, valued at around $1.5 million, was built from decades of consistent character work across more than 70 films and hundreds of television appearances. His legacy remains carved into American cinema through the terrifying image of the mountain man, Charlie Boorman as Ed's boy. Charlie Boorman was born on August 23, 1966, in London, England. At 6 years old, he appeared in Deliverance, 1972, as Ed's boy, the quiet child waiting at the film's emotional resolution. His moment on screen was brief, but it marked the beginning of a lifelong collaboration with his father, director Jon Boorman. And from that first step into cinema, his life would veer into danger, adventure, and survival. His marriage to Olivia Payton, beginning in 2003, became a steady foundation through years of travel, filming, and long-distance separation. While projects like Excalibur, 1981, and The Emerald Forest, 1985, shaped his early career, it was the later motorcycle expeditions, recorded in Long Way Round, 2004, and Long Way Down, 2007, that pulled him away from home for months at a time. Dyslexia made formal acting work difficult, and the unpredictability of his documentary schedule often strained the balance between ambition and family. His illness arrived suddenly in 2010, when a testicular cancer diagnosis forced him into surgery and recovery that halted all filming commitments. The experience reshaped him, turning the later Long Way series, including Long Way Up, 2020, into platforms for men's health awareness. Whether through Africa or South America, his career became proof of a resilience built from years of surviving both illness and impact. In 2025, Boorman is 59 years old, continuing his charity work with UNICEF while leading global adventure tours and appearing in stage events. His estimated $4 million net worth comes from television travel series, books, and international touring rather than traditional acting. And despite the scars in the personal life, he remains a symbol of endurance, far removed from the quiet child audiences first saw in Deliverance. James Dickey as Sheriff Bullard. James Dickey was born on December 2, 1923, in Atlanta, Georgia. At 49 years old, he appeared in Deliverance, 1972, as Sheriff Bullard, the quiet investigator whose presence added a haunting realism to the final act, fitting, since the film was based on his own novel. His cameo blurred the line between author and character. And from that moment, his life as a writer and public figure grew even more turbulent. His marriages unraveled under the weight of his alcoholism and the volatility that fame brought. His first marriage to Maxine Sierson survived nearly 3 decades, but fractured during the whirlwind of acclaim that followed Buck Dancer's Choice, 1965, and his appointment as U.S. Poet Laureate in 1966. His second marriage to Deborah Dodson was marked by long stretches of teaching, touring, and literary obligations after Deliverance became a bestseller, leaving their home life fragmented by his relentless schedule. Even as he wrote The Strength of Fields for Jimmy Carter's 1977 inauguration, the strain within his family deepened instead of easing. His health began deteriorating in the late 1980s, shaped by years of heavy drinking that damaged his liver and led to jaundice long before pulmonary fibrosis appeared. Teaching his final classes at the University of South Carolina required increasing effort, especially as breathing difficulties worsened each semester. By the mid-1990s, his hospitalizations grew more frequent, even as he continued lecturing and revising poems for Poems 1957 to 1967, pushing his body harder than his doctors believed possible. Dickey died on January 19, 1997, at age 73 in Columbia, South Carolina, just 6 days after teaching his last class. His 2025 estate, valued at around $2 million, comes primarily from continuing sales of Deliverance, 1970, university archives, and poetry collections that remain staples in American literature. This legacy occupies a vast space. The poet who wrote America's Wilderness Nightmares and then stepped into the frame as Sheriff Bullard, watching his own creation swallow the men who entered it. Billy Redden as Lonnie. Billy Redden was born on October 13, 1956, in Clayton, Georgia. At 16 years old, he portrayed Lonnie, the eerie banjo-playing boy whose unsettling stare made Deliverance, 1972, unforgettable, even though he never played a note himself. His brief appearance binded him to the film long after the credits, and from that moment on, his life would be defined not by Hollywood, but by its shadow. He never married, withdrawing instead into a quiet life in Rouben County as roles dried up and the mountain boy image followed him everywhere he went. Even when Tim Burton cast him in Big Fish, 2003, or when Italian filmmakers brought him into Blast Fighter, 1984, the work only reinforced the stereotype that had shaped his career. While others moved on from Deliverance, Redden found himself returning to ordinary jobs: cook, dishwasher, small cafe co-owner, trying to build a stable life away from the film that had made him recognizable. His struggles were not medical as much as economic, worsened by decades of typecasting that limited his opportunities and kept him anchored to low-paying local work. The documentary The Deliverance of Rouben County, 2012, revisited the emotional toll the film had taken on him, especially the disappointment of never receiving substantial residuals. By then, any return to Hollywood was physically and financially difficult, leaving local jobs as the only sustainable path forward. In 2025, Redden is 69 years old, still living modestly in Georgia and occasionally appearing at local film events connected to Deliverance. His estimated net worth, about $100,000, reflects a lifetime built not from cinema, but from the steady, uncelebrated jobs that kept him afloat. And yet, through a single scene filmed in the mountains in 1972, he became part of American film history. Herbert "Cowboy" Coward as Toothless Man. Herbert "Cowboy" Coward was born on February 12, 1939, in Haywood County, North Carolina. At 33 years old, he portrayed the Toothless Man in Deliverance, 1972, the feral mountain figure whose chilling line, "He got a real pretty mouth," became one of the most quoted in American film. His raw appearance and unsettling presence gave the scene a realism no trained actor could replicate. And that single role would follow him for the rest of his life, shaping a career he never expected to have. His first marriage fell apart after only a few years, driven by long stretches of separation while he drifted between labor jobs and seasonal acting work at Ghost Town in the Sky. Even when he briefly reunited with his wife in the mountains, the financial instability of early acting roles, especially after Deliverance thrust him into a spotlight he didn't know how to navigate, made the relationship fragile. Later roles in Ghost Town, the movie, 2007, and appearances on Moonshiners, 2013, offered him renewed recognition, but none brought the stability needed to repair the intimacy the early years had eroded. He never suffered long-term illness, but his body carried decades of physical labor, stunt work, and the wear of factory shifts at BASF, where he worked nearly 3 decades after Deliverance. The most devastating blow came not from disease, but from tragedy. The 2024 car collision that ended his life, his girlfriend's life, and the small pets they traveled with. By that time, years of rugged work had already slowed him, though he continued making small TV appearances tied to Appalachian storytelling and the legacy of Deliverance. Coward died on January 24, 2024, at age 85 in a highway accident in North Carolina, leaving behind a modest estate valued at around $500,000. His income came largely from factory work, occasional film roles, and decades of tourism appearances linked to Ghost Town. His legacy endures in a single unforgettable performance. Belinda Beatty as Martha Gentry. Belinda Beatty was born on April 26, 1950, in Kentucky. At 22 years old, she appeared in Deliverance, 1972, as Martha Gentry, Ed's wife in the closing scene, a quiet but grounding presence symbolizing the world the men desperately fought to return to. Though brief, her appearance contributed to the emotional release after the film's relentless terror. And that moment would become one of the few stepping stones in a small but meaningful screen career. Her marriage to Ned Beatty began in 1971 and endured through the early years of his rising fame, surviving his intense filming schedule for Nashville, 1975, and Network, 1976. Yet the very success that lifted their household also pulled them apart. The constant travel, long productions, and growing media attention created a distance their marriage couldn't overcome. They divorced in 1979, though she continued supporting their 2 children privately while choosing a life far away from Hollywood's noise. She faced no widely documented illnesses, but the stress of balancing 2 children and a dissolving marriage during Ned Beatty's busiest decade placed a quiet but undeniable strain on her. As he filmed projects like Superman, 1978, and Friendly Fire, 1979, her own acting appearances in Stroker Ace, 1983, and Murder, She Wrote, 1984, became intermittent, shaped by the need to create stability at home rather than pursue a sustained career on screen. In 2025, Belinda Beatty is 75 years old and living a private life in Kentucky, far removed from the industry that once touched her briefly. Her estimated 2025 net worth of around $2 million reflects a combination of her own limited acting work and the inheritance connected to Ned Beatty's estate. Though she left Hollywood decades ago, her final scene in Deliverance remains a symbolic reminder of safety, normalcy, and the fragile life waiting for the men who survived the river. And now you've seen the real story behind the cast of Deliverance, a journey far darker than anything on screen. But which actor's fate shocked you the most? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next untold story.